Mike and John and myself, JB. And John, it's finally here, man. You do just beyond excellent work with covering the Gamecocks, of course, and it does appear like we've kind of got the answers now. I know that one of the pressing stories for people regarding this team, based on Coach Maneri's comments on our show last week, were what's going on with Eli Jersenbeck. And I don't know the answer as to what is going on, but based on what happened Saturday, he will not be starting next weekend. That's for sure. He'll probably get a midweek following that. It seems like Jake McCoy probably in line to round out the rotation. But glad to have you. Happy opening week. I know you're excited about it, and give us your thoughts on that group.
Yeah, for sure. One more scrimmage this afternoon at 3:30, and I guess the weather today is going to be like it will this weekend. It's about a high of about 53 today here in Columbia. A little dark, a little overcast, a little dreary. I think that's what we'll see this weekend after some temperatures of 78 on Saturday. Beautiful day at Founders
every year,
and over at Beckham Field too for Ashley Chastain and her 5-0 softball team. So. But yeah, really excited to get this thing going. Looking forward to seeing one more scrimmage today, one last little tune up. I think, as you said, the whole position stuff is all those position battles have kind of run its course, and I think we know where everything's going to be. Still think Paul Maneri and his staff are deciding who's going to catch that third game on Sunday and who's kind of won that backup job, at least for now, between Max Coffer and Ryan Bakes. That's been really closely contested, but other than that, I think we pretty much know what's going on.
Yeah, I did too. I think I got a feeling it'll be Bakes on Sunday. That's just my feeling. Something, Mike, you'll love this. I mean, you know Coach Maneri. You've called a bunch of his games and stuff like that. We've gotten to know him pretty well. Very honest guy. I was chatting with him before they scrimmaged on Saturday, and this struck me as much as anything, guys. I won't say the player wasn't anything bad, but he had a player trotting by, and he stopped him in his tracks while we were in the middle of a conversation, and his pant leg was pulled up, high socks. There was about maybe an inch gap between the top of his sock and the bottom of his pant leg, and he wouldn't let him run onto the field until that kneecap was covered. And I just kind of smiled and mentioned that to Billy later, Billy Anderson. And the little details that seemingly were missing have all returned to this program. There is an accountability factor here that just wasn't really around, at least for a little while. Mike, Coach Maneri, your thoughts on that? And John, you've been out there basically for every scrimmage and everything that you could possibly be there for. How much more of that have you seen? Mike, we'll start with you.
Well, I'll just say this on Maneri, covering him for several years at LSU. He is very meticulous. His father is a legendary coach in Miami. Much like Ray, they both believe there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. They haven't succumbed to this. Well, that was then, but now you got to do things differently when you're handling college baseball players. No, there's going to be an incredible attention to detail. He's going to be very meticulous on each and everything that this team does. Again, all these things remind me of Ray Tanner.
100%.
That's just like they're not going to change their ways because, well, now it's 2025 and you have to quote unquote adapt. The players adapt. The coaching style remains the same, and it's been pretty good based on the results that Paul Maneri has had everywhere he's been. And I think I don't want that to be misconstrued as, well, he's just a hard ass. No, the players love him. Talk to players that played for him on the national championship team at LSU or the World Series team at Notre Dame, and they love him like a father. He's like a father figure, just like so many former players. There are probably times that they were like, God, Ray is just on my ass, that guy. And then when you win and you finish playing for him, it's like, man, I love him. I needed him. He got the best out of me. And that's what Paul Maneri will do at Carolina. I'm convinced of that.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think the thing I keep using, the phrase I keep using the most is is he's brought a lot more structure into this program.
1,000.
There's which I think is very important in college sports, college baseball for sure. So I think that's probably the biggest difference in the program now versus what it has been. And you see it in things like the example you gave, Jamie, but you see it in a lot of other ways too. And I think players want that. I think when they know what the expectations are and what you want out of them on a day-to-day basis, it gives them something to strive for and something to accomplish. And I just feel like that's better for everybody. And, I think that's certainly something that you're going to see a lot of this year when in the little things, in the way they play the game, in the way they approach the game.
Something too, and this is, I'm never going to turn this program into pick on former coaches. Like, I'm not going to sit here and pick on Mark Kingston and stuff like that. A guy treated us unbelievably in his time here. I wish him all the best. You lose games in this league. Everybody loses games. It is way too hard to think that you're going to run out there and just steamroll everybody. It is not ever going to happen. But one of the things that I think that is beginning to resonate with the fan base is the fact that Paul Mainieri understands that while you lose games in this league, you don't use it as a crutch for losing games in this league. Does that make sense? Like, I felt like we heard a lot of, and hey, look, I'm not going to say I'm guilty of this, but I backed up King a lot and saying, hey, you are going to lose baseball games. But he respects the fact that this is the University of South Carolina. And it's like, it was actually told to me this weekend, maybe 2 or 3 months into the job here, Coach Mainieri looked around and thought, man, this place really has kind of taken a confidence hit. Like, that should not be the case. He envisioned South Carolina like he envisioned when he coached against them. Like, it's always going to be difficult, whether it's Ray, Chad, whoever's in the dugout, the respect factor. And it took, after being here for a couple of months, it kind of dawned on him, like, these guys have, like, I don't know how much they expect to win around here right now. He very much thinks that this team is going to be in the mix this year. There's no question about that. And John, I think, to your point and Mike's point, the structure and the accountability and the demand of excellence, like, you're never going to be perfect, right? But if you don't try to be perfect, what are you actually going to be? And these guys every day seem to have that mentality of, like, Carolina baseball is back, and we're going to go out there and we're going to prove that to people. There's a lot that don't believe in us, and that's okay. But they expect to be really, really good. I just don't know if that was here the last few years.
Yeah, and I don't know that it was either. I agree with what you were trying to say about, understanding that the league's difficult, but not using that as a crutch. And it's 100% true. I mean, you look at it. I was reading some stuff from D1 Baseball today. Mark Etheridge does a tremendous job in crunching numbers and looking at schedules and strength of schedule and so forth. And he's got South Carolina is the most difficult SEC schedule this year out of all the conference teams. I mean, it's real based on his numbers, but I don't expect South Carolina to really use that as a crutch and say, hey, this might be too tough for us. You heard Paul Mainieri on your show last week, and we heard him at the preseason press conference saying, I don't know what these people are doing, thinking that they're 14th, 15th in the league. I've watched a lot of baseball. I've watched these guys. They're good. We can compete with anybody. So, I certainly admire that level of confidence in him, and certainly would hope that is the expectation within the program, but you haven't always been able to feel that necessarily here in recent years.
I will say this on that, John. Unlike the situation with basketball and NIL, which we got into last week, where Carolina is in the lower third, that's not an issue in baseball. I know for a fact that they are very competitive in that arena, and that's what it's going to take. When I look back at the last couple of coaches, people can poke holes all they want into King and into Chad. And every SEC roster has a future big leaguer on it. So it's not necessary to say, well, what about this guy? What about that guy? We had some talent. Absolutely. But I haven't felt like Carolina's been a top 5 talent team in the SEC in a long time. So while coaching and setting up the rotation and when to pull a pitcher, coming up with the line, all these things that are strategic play a role. The Gamecocks are going to have to do a better job, and some of this is evaluation, and some of it is just winning recruiting battles. They're going to have to do a better job in roster construction. That, to me, has been the biggest thing keeping this program getting back to Omaha. And I know that goes against the grain of just wanting to rip the coaches every time something goes wrong, and that's fine. They're not above criticism. It's been a long time surveying this league where I felt like Carolina's got a top 5 roster in the SEC.
Yeah, I agree with you 1,000% on that. You know, we could talk NIL for, you know, the rest of this show and all the way through the end of JC's show. I'm not. My opinions on NIL kind of go against the grain for a lot of folks, but without getting into that, you know, I do think that South Carolina has certainly not been in the best place when it comes to a roster construction standpoint. You know, to go through and when you've had a couple of injuries and had to do some of the things you've had to do in terms of putting players in different spots, you know, it's been a real challenge. There have been holes basically every year, and holes in places where there just can't be. And you know, I think South Carolina did a decent job this past off season of addressing some of those needs, and some guys who I kind of scratched my head with in terms of takes on who they've gotten. You know, they've been better than I thought, and some guys are going to be better, I think, on this team than I thought they would be. But that being said, you know, I was asked a question on the message board yesterday, I guess it was a couple days ago. You know, why was South Carolina picked 14th? Why were they picked 15th? And you know, you look at what South Carolina got out of the portal, and you know, there's really only one kind of highlight guy out of that transfer portal class, and that's Henry Kasmer. I mean, you look at some of the other guys, and most all of them were backups or not major contributors, and so much of what coaches and media pundits are looking at when they you know, project league outcomes in the preseason, they're looking at what you brought in the portal, because that's such a huge deal of you know, your current roster. And you know, Nathan Hall was a backup at Clemson, and Nolan Naraki, he played some. He was hurt. He had a bit of success, but you know, he was at times a backup too. Max Coffer was a backup. Jarvis Evans at Georgia, his results were mixed. Wyatt Evans didn't make the roster at Tennessee last year. Ashton Crowther, you know, he wasn't a frontline guy at Miami, and had I mean, to be honest, had bad numbers at Miami. So, you know, I mean, I think that's kind of why South Carolina was picked at the bottom, near the bottom of the league. But some of these guys have been really good. Nathan Hall's been phenomenal. Nolan Naraki is really starting to find his legs. I think there's a spot for Jarvis Evans and Ashton Crowther on this pitching staff. So, you know, I think it's coming together pretty nicely. But at the same time, you know, I don't think that South Carolina's got a bunch of the top end talent that some of these other teams do right now.
And you guys know this, but just to add to that, because I'm sure some people are listening to that and they're saying, well, wait a minute, Paul Maneri is a great recruiter. What happened? This is the one disadvantage of making a coaching change. When you make a coaching change in baseball, so many of the key players have already committed. So you're navigating in waters that are not nearly chock full of high-end, talented, proven commodities than when you have a coach that's been there for however many years. So nobody would argue the coaching change, right? But you have to understand when you make that change, it's going to take a hit. You're not going to, in year one, bring in this unbelievable group of talented players that are established and whatnot, because those relationships and those decisions have been years in the making, And you can't just make up for lost time when you grab. When was he officially hired? I know we interviewed him. When was that?
June,
mid-June, something like that.
yeah.
Okay, so by then, guys, you know this. I mean, most of those key players have already made up their minds, or they're leaning one way or another. So it's very tough as a first-year head coach to just all of a sudden start having an unbelievable portal class or recruiting, et cetera, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, Monty was trying to hold it together as well as he could for as long as he did. But, I mean, they had guys come in on official visits when there was no head coach because these guys wanted to make a decision. But how's that guy going to commit to South Carolina when he doesn't know who the head coach is going to be? I mean, there are a couple of guys over at Mississippi State. There's a couple of guys over at Georgia who were in here who, really liked South Carolina but couldn't commit. A couple of those were in-state guys. So, it's just – you're right. I mean, that's just part of it. South Carolina got some guys that they really wanted. I mean, they were super stoked about getting Nate Hall, into the fold. And he's been phenomenal. But, I mean, he wasn't on the field at Clemson very much last year. And it wasn't because he was hurt. They just had other guys playing ahead of him. So, I think when you get into, why would South Carolina pick where they were? I mean, I think that's kind of the root of it for sure. And, there's only one guy who was picked to be on a preseason All-SEC team, and really the only guy who really deserved to be in the conversation to be picked on a preseason All-SEC team. And obviously that's Ethan Petrie, and he's been phenomenal. I expect him to continue to be. But everybody's got one guy. I mean, I'm sure Missouri's got one guy.
Of course they do.
You got to have more than one guy.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And there's just a lot, man, there's a lot to unpack here. So a couple of things. I'm glad you brought up Monty in that situation, because Monty did an incredible job, if you ask me, John, in keeping this ship afloat while they were trying to figure out what was going on. He was vying for the job. We know he wanted the job. Of course, Paul Maneri comes in. I think he did as good of a job as anybody out there could have done. Had it not been Monty Lee, who bleeds the garnet and black, if it was just somebody in that seat, I don't think this roster would be near what it is. You mentioned Nate Hall. Coach Maneri said this weekend to me, and we'll talk to him about this on Friday a little bit more in depth. He said, you know what Nate Hall needed? Just somebody to love on him. And I was like, what do you mean by that? He was like, look at him. Look at his body. He said, Jamie, that's a big league body right there. You know that, right? That's what a big leaguer looks like right there. And he just needed someone to love on him. They weren't doing it at Clemson. And, so you bring him in, and we know he's talented. John, he's talented. But he's got a group that believes in him. And by the way, I'm anxious to see Nate Hall game 1 and Nate Hall game 50, because there's a lot of pure baseball in that kid. I mean, the ball just flies off of his bat. And then you've got another situation here, guys. And if you go back to when they won the World Series, or Mike, when you were calling the games for the Gamecocks in the early 2000s, they had their superstars, right? We knew who their superstars were, the Drew Myers and the Landon Powells of the world, and the Trip Kellys. You can name the superstars, but they always had just baseball players, right? They always had just dudes, dirtbags, Kevin Melillo and Garris Gantz and guys like that. And then when they won the World Series, you had the Adrian Moraleses and the Scott Wingos and
how valuable is Price?
Yeah, the dirtbag. I mean, these guys just. I think this group's got a lot of that. And I think one of the things that I've learned, John, about Coach Maneri, to the point that you made about, okay, maybe we didn't go out and sign 10 superstars or whatever, or at least that everybody else thought were superstars. I know they like their guys, but we're going to squeeze all the freaking juice we can out of the kids that we've got here. And you look at some of the guys who've been around for a while, like my hunch tells me, I know Tippett has struggled a little bit in the preseason. He's going to have some moments this year. He's due. He's been around a while. Evan Stone, he's going to have his moments this year. I've got high expectations for Matthew Becker. I like Matthew Becker. When you look at his build, his body as a lefty, he looks like an SEC guy. You got Dalton Mayshore, and he's just a baseball player. The Catsmar kid who you mentioned, John, and then you've got some superstars. I think you got some budding ones too. Kennedy Jones, hits a baseball like a big leaguer does when he hits it. So I just think there's a lot here. And Talmadge Leroy is a dirtbag. Does he play like a dirtbag for 50 something games? There's a lot here, and I'll be anxious to see, going back to the very first thing we talked about, the structure and accountability that he's brought to this program. Generally, that breeds success as time goes along. I think this group's got a chance, John.
Well, and I think you hit on a key point right there in what you were saying is it's going to be up to the coaching staff to get every bit of talent out of this team that they can because of some of the factors we talked about earlier in terms of, just how high is the ceiling of this team in terms of talent level. There's one all SEC guy right now. I think there can be a couple more. I wouldn't rule out Kennedy Jones. I think Nathan Hall will certainly be right there in that mix. I think Matthew Becker will be right there in that mix at the end. And there's some upper echelon talent who haven't, put it all together just yet. Jake McCoy looked so much better the other day than he has the first couple of preseason scrimmages. He has all SEC kind of talent. Somebody in the chat box earlier asked about Eli Jersenbeck and whether it's mechanical or mental. I'll be honest, whether it's when you're pitching as poorly as he is right now, it's a little bit of everything. We know that he's a little bit of a quirky guy and kind of marches to the beat of his own drum. I think they're trying to take a little bit of the jurors out of the jurors right now, and I don't know how well that's working. So hopefully both sides can kind of find the right balance of how to maximize his talent, and that's going to be a big part of it. Not only with him, but with all these guys is just trying to find the sweet spot for all of these guys to get the most out of them. Because if you don't get the most out of them, maybe you are the 14th or 15th most talented in the league, but that may not be how you play over the course of the year. If you can get everything out of your guys, you might be way up there at the end of the season, because I do think this team does have some talent. And I think that's the key point, is just kind of maximizing everybody and getting the most out of everybody that you can.
Mike, it looks like this name hopefully becomes very popular if he stays in that role. Brendan Sweeney seems to be the closer to start the season. He's big, like really big. The history of this program, when you've got a guy that you trust at the back end, it always works out for Carolina. There's not one year where they went into the season with an idea of a guy to be a closer who ended up being the closer that didn't actually, for the most part, end in Omaha. And I'm not necessarily predicting that. Maybe I will. I don't know. But when you've got a closer in this league, you call baseball games in every ballpark out there. It's hard to pitch in this league when you're on the road. And if you got a guy who's got that mentality, who you can throw in the 8th or the 9th inning to go shut it down, you've got a leg up on a lot of teams that you'll play against.
Well, yeah, Carolina had such a luxury. You mentioned the time frame, and I go back to 2000. Those 10 years alone before Price became one of the best. He went on a heater that'll go down in the history of one of the best clutch performances by a closer in a 2-year span in the history of the sport. But you start with Barber, and then Gronk, and then Blake, and then Chad Blackwell in 2004. It just on and on and on and on and on. That has been a thing. And due to some of the question marks in the rotation, I think that becomes even more important, Jamie, because you may not have as many of those. Hey, we got a 2-run lead in the 9th situation. You may not have as many as you hope for, because there's a lot of moving parts here. It's still a work in progress. You're still trying to figure out who your best guys are. So when you do have a 5-2 lead in the 9th, man, you better slam the door, because when you lose a game like that, it is so crippling psychologically. You only get 30 conference games, and when you're fortunate enough to have a lead in the 9th, you better have a guy that can slam the door. Otherwise, that's how your season can turn upside down. So, yeah, I think it's going to be very important to have a guy you feel confident in closing out games.
Yeah, and Mike, you can keep on going past Matt Price too. There were several All-Americans after that as well. Tyler Webb was an All-American, and Tyler Johnson was an All-American, and even Joel Seddon. Nobody remembers Joel Seddon. Joel Seddon was an All-American.
Yes,
there've been a lot of Brett Carey. There've been a lot of great guys who have filled that closer role, and Sweeney's given up more hits than I would have thought just by looking at him. But he hit 97 the other day. I look forward to seeing him. I think he's certainly the odds-on favorite. But Zach Russell is a freshman who I think they're hoping will emerge into one of those late inning guys too. He gets it up there really good. His command is he's still trying to figure it out a little bit. But he wasn't on the mound for most of the fall. They were about to cut him. And they said, well, let's look at him on the bump before we get rid of him. And he's flourishing there. So I think at the end of the year, you're going to have two guys who are really competing for that job, who have closer-like stuff. Sweeney's certainly got the closer-like build. You're going to have two guys with closer-like stuff.
You've got just from the guys who pitched last year, and then if you want to throw Jerzenbeck in from 2023, you're returning 277 and a third innings. Guys who wore this uniform, 245 from last year, 245 and 2/3. But Jerzenbeck from 23 gets that to 277 and 44 starts. And you look at last year, and they finished 33 and 21 last year in the regular season, right? And then they went 4-4 in the postseason. Had a great run, a heartbreaking run over in Hoover. And then you had the regional, and there was 6 or 7 games that I was counting this morning that you can say they should have won. I don't really know if you want to say it that way, but absolutely could have won. 1-run games where they had leads and just couldn't hang on. And, if you take 3 or 4 of those 7 and reverse them, you're talking about a team at the end of the season, instead of going to Raleigh, who's probably hosting, number one, and who knows from there. Hell, they could have won the SEC tournament had they not coughed up what they did against LSU. So it's going back to something Paul Mainieri has been saying for a long time since he's been here. Look, I didn't step into a situation that's broken. It's not like we're in the depths of the dark seas around.
It's not Missouri.
No, like you're talking about a handful of games. If Carolina can maintain who they were, and then you figure out a way to win that handful of games that they couldn't, you're talking about a team that who knows what can happen, right, John? I mean,
and to your point, at the end of last year, I mean, those late game losses, they weren't all on the pitchers. In fact, few of them were. I mean, they were so awful defensively at the end of last year. I mean, the reason they went on that SEC tournament run, and I mean, y'all correct me if y'all disagree with me. I mean, Cole Messina carried that team through that SEC tournament. And, there were a couple of folks who helped them out along the way, picked up the slack a little bit, but that was the Cole Messina tournament right there. But, one thing that's been really encouraging for me here lately is this team in these scrimmages have played completely clean defense, like no errors. At least the last 3 games. I need to go back and see if it's further than that. But I know the last 3, they've played error-free ball, and that's really, really encouraging. KJ Scobie's really come along at third base. Ethan Petrie, bless his heart, as bad as he was at first base last year, he has gotten so much better this year. That was one of the reasons why I was really nervous about this team, to be honest with you, is, KJ Scobie led the team in the fall in errors. Ethan Petrie, we thought might be the first baseman, and he was so terrible at it last year at the end. And Thomas LaCroix behind the plate, or whoever the catcher was going to be behind the plate, there's just going to be such a significant drop-off after Cole. Those 3 guys handle the baseball a lot. And if you're poor defensively at those 3 spots, you're not going to be very good. And, Talmadge has impressed me, these last couple of weeks. Ethan's really impressed me these last couple of weeks. KJ's really impressed me the last couple of weeks. And all of a sudden I feel much better about where this team is defensively with the way they're playing. And that alone for me has helped kind of boost my confidence that this team can really be competitive.
John, we got to get you out of here in just a minute, and Mike will take us to a break here. If I had to guess, opening day, Hall and center leading off. Kasmar will hit in the 2-hole and play short. Petrie will play first and hit third. Kennedy will DH and hit fourth. I'm going to go with Lee Croy in the 5-hole behind the plate. Mayshore in the 6th hole and right. Naraki in the 7-hole at second. I'm going to go with I think they'll hit Scobie 8th at third, and then Blake Jackson in the 9-hole and left. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I think that's what it'll be. That's what it's been the last couple of scrimmages.
I'm a genius, Mike. Give me a lottery ticket.
You are beyond your years.
Yeah, I would have had Jackson up there a little bit higher, but there's something to be said about having that second lead off or what have you down at the bottom of the order. I think he gives you a good competitive at bat, so I can certainly see him there. In Scobie in the 8, I actually had Jackson up there at 7 behind Mayshore and in front of Naraki. But yeah, I think that's what it's going to be. I do think. And I'll part with this, but I do think there's a chance you see Kennedy Jones in left field some, and he's gotten a lot better out there. Like it used to be oceans of a gap between Kennedy Jones and Blake Jackson as to who was better defensively, and it's not that anymore. It's not far from even. Kennedy's really been impressive. Now he hasn't been throwing, and I don't know whether it's been elbow, shoulder, or what have you from the outfield. So I think that's limiting him right now. He has tossed the ball in overhand a few times here lately, but I think you'll see Jackson out in left. But don't be surprised to see Kennedy Jones out in left from time to time if Paul wants to do a little something different at the DH spot. Kennedy can go out there and be much better in the field and defensively than he could at any point last year.
And Evan Stone will play this weekend too. I sure hope when he gets in there, I would take 100 Evan Stones if someone gave them to me. So
who did you say, Jamie, you had hitting cleanup?
Kennedy Jones. Kennedy Jones.
Well, he becomes one of the most important players in the SEC because I can't imagine there's going to be a lot of pitchers that are going to want to challenge Petrie. So, and let's face it, this could be a lineup with some holes in it, right? Teams that win a national championship very often have a 9-hole hitter hitting just above the Mendoza line. So that's not a slight. Like that's reality. There's not every lineup in the SEC is just chock full of guys hitting 350. So you need somebody behind him so the pitchers aren't just like, well, just if it's a key spot, we'll just walk them. You need a guy that's really going to be able to make them pay if that's the case and make them think twice about doing it again.
Well,
I don't know. I don't know if he's that guy or not, but that's going to be thrust upon him or whoever is hitting behind Petrie.
Yeah, if Kennedy, John, if he swings it like he's shown he's capable of swinging it, I tell you right now, if I was playing third base and Kennedy Jones walked to the plate, I would go out and play on the edge of the grass.
Yeah, well, he's hitting on a different level this year than he did at any point last year. Kennedy Jones only had 2 more home runs than Will Tippett had last year, and everybody bags on Tippett for his offense. Kennedy did a great job last year offensively, hitting with runners on base, and that's why folks feel really fond of him and his offensive ability, and they should. But he's hitting the ball right now at a completely different level than he did last year, which is something that's really encouraging. So appreciate you guys. Y'all have a good rest of the day.
You're the man, John. Thank you, brother. Yeah, Kennedy Jones is hitting what missiles right now.
Would you agree with what I said? Like that becomes so important.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. Yeah, no doubt, dude. If you're protecting the best hitter on the team, you got to hit.